Development charges are applied across all type of assets, including institutional, industrial, commercial, and residential. In this video, I'm going to focus primarily on residentials, and to be more specific, we're going to look specifically at the typology multiplexes. So how are development charges applied to multiplexes? So let's jump into some of the details here. So in most cities around Ontario, including Toronto, which we're going to focus on here, development charges are applied to residential properties and multiplexes. In this case, we're going to look at a very specific case where we're building a new 4+1. And when I say 4+1, I'm referring to a property that has 4 units within the main dwelling in addition to 1 unit in a detached structure. It could be a laneway or it could be a garden suite. So development charges are applied based on the number of units. So we're going to essentially show you here a unit overlay on the property. So the primary residence would be considered to be 1 unit or the main unit on the property. It might be principal, it might be referred to as primary, but that's going to be unit number 1. In Toronto, the first unit that you place on a new development would actually be chargeable. So exemption status is that it is chargeable, meaning you would have to pay development charges on the first unit that you place on that property. And there are some nuances here, and there may be some credits that could be involved depending on if you demolished an existing property and then you build a new unit, first unit, or rebuilt or replaced the first unit. But in most cases, there are development charges that would apply. And what we're looking at here from a category standpoint, we're just saying that for an example, we're using a 2-bedroom rental unit. There is a difference between whether the property is going to be rented versus owned or sold. So development charges may be applied differently. And then the categories, that the rate that we're looking at are the general services rate and the engineering services rate. I will put a link in the description to a few of these different informational documentations. So this is all could be found on the city website as well. And then of course the DC payable is like 1 times this rate. So whatever you're doing, there will be DCs that will be applied to this particular property, and it is pinned at a very specific rate. In this case, a 2-bedroom is roughly around $60 to $65,000 depending on if credits are applied or not. And then of course, as I mentioned earlier on, I want to put a very important note here is that it is actually applied to the first unit on the lot. This usually attracts DCs, okay? So I'm going to just go through the additional units. So this is a 4-plex. So we're going to talk about the second unit. So you added a second unit, of course. We're just going to do the unit overlay. We're also adding a 3rd unit. And then, of course, we're going to add a 4th unit as well. So all of these additional units. So now we have a property that contains 4 units. Well, what type of DCs are going to be applied to these units? So the second, the 3rd, and the 4th units, they are all exempted from DCs. They are all waived, meaning you do not have to apply any type of additional costs. So for example, if they're all 2-bedroom units, it means that you would actually be able to avoid the cost of paying $60,000 for each of those units. Times 3 can be $180,000. As you can see, those can very quickly add up. And it's very important that you go and you do your own research as well. You can look at the Toronto Municipal Code 415 in section 6. There's where you'll find all this information that I'm discussing here on this recording. Now, in this case, we're also building a +1. +1 is referring to this detached structure, and this detached structure is the 5th unit on this parcel. So as per the zoning bylaws in Toronto, you are allowed to do 5 dwelling units on a single parcel of land as of right. So that means that you would actually be able to build this garden suite. Now we're talking about development charges. So the development charges on an ancillary dwelling unit, this is exempted, but it is exempted in a very specific way. It is exempted through a deferral. So it is required to be paid, but it is deferred, and is deferred for a very specific period of time. So we are just going to say here that we're looking at, for example, a 2-bedroom detached dwelling unit. And you may be thinking, well, you can Airbnb or short-term rental or mid-term rental this property. Well, if you're going to do using a strategy like that or use it for your own self, you may not be able to get the deferral because the deferral is based on a very specific development charges deferral agreement that you would have with the city, and that's under the laneway and garden suite program. So you have to have this document signed, and some of the requirements within there is that you have to probably rent it out for a specific time period. I think it's usually 12, 20 years, and you have to maintain that medium rental rate that is specified by the city of Toronto. So if these are things that you cannot necessarily stick to, then you probably want to not necessarily engage in this program. Now, with that said, the development rate is still going to apply to both the general services and the engineering services. And I really do want to note here is that if, for example, you actually rent this property out, right, then you will be eligible for this type of deferral. This is very, very important note. So let's take a look at the DC overlay for this type of asset where we're looking at the scenario where we're building a new built 4+1. So DCs will be applied to unit number 1. Unit number 2, 3, and 4 will be exempted under the municipal code 415, and the garden suite, which is a detached structure, can be deferred under a specific agreement with the city.